The air doesn't just feel cold, it feels hollowed out. Like someone scooped the warmth right out of the room and left only the brittle shell. I'm sitting across the polished table, watching his face crumble, piece by agonizing piece. His eyes, usually so sharp, so sure, are wide and glassy. There's a faint tremor in his hands where they rest on the dark wood. A paper lies between us. Small, unassuming, but it carries the weight of an anvil. It's not just a paper. It's the end of his world. And the quiet, unexpected reclamation of mine. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the faint hum of the office lights above. He opens his mouth, but no sound comes out. Just a ragged breath that catches in his throat like a fishbone. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me share these stories more than you know. Life before this felt cushioned, safe. It wasn't just the absence of hardship, it was the presence of a quiet, underlying security. My family built things. Not just businesses, but institutions. Legacies. They believed in providing, yes, but also in protecting. That's where the trust came in. My grandfather, a man whose foresight was as legendary as his fortune, had established it decades ago. A sprawling, complex legal entity designed to ensure that whatever he left behind would care for his descendants, not be squandered or seized. For me, it represented not just financial freedom, but a promise. A promise that even if everything else failed, this foundation would remain. A bedrock beneath my feet. I met Mark during that comfortable era. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely captivated by me. He wasn't for money, and he never pretended to be. He worked hard, projected confidence, and spoke about building our future together, not just his. He admired my background, he said, but he loved me. I believed him. We built a life that felt normal, comfortable. The inheritance, when it came, was substantial. More money than I could realistically spend in several lifetimes, held within the framework of the trust, providing a steady, significant income and the assurance that the principal was untouchable, managed by trustees my grandfather had handpicked for their integrity and expertise. Mark was impressed, naturally, but he never seemed overly focused on the money itself. Not back then, anyway. He talked about our shared goals, our home, our plans for the future. The first hint that the bedrock wasn't as solid as I thought wasn't a dramatic fight or a tearful confession. It was quieter, more insidious. It started with little things. Late nights at work that stretched longer and longer. A new phone he was cagey about. A subtle shift in his demeanor, a new slickness I hadn't seen before. My gut twisted, a cold, silent knot forming deep inside. I told myself I was being paranoid. That stress from his job was changing him. I made excuses. For him, and for the growing unease blooming in my own chest. Then came the email. Or rather, the email I wasn't supposed to see. He'd left his laptop open, minimized. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was just using it to look up a recipe. And there it was. An open tab. A bank transfer confirmation. A sum so large it made my breath hitch. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize. With a note that simply said, "For us." Starting fresh, the recipient's name wasn't random. I knew it. A colleague he'd been working closely with. Sarah. My world tilted. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. The scale of it. This wasn't a secret credit card or a gambling debt. This was a deliberate, massive transfer of my inheritance, the very thing that was supposed to be protected, siphoned away to her. This starting fresh line felt like a physical blow. Starting fresh with her. Using my security. I froze. My mind scrambled, trying to piece together how this was even possible. The trust, the money was supposed to be untouchable. Locked down tighter than Fort Knox. How could he possibly access the principal? My hands trembled as I scrolled, searching for anything else. More confirmations. Smaller amounts leaving my personal accounts, funneling into the same unknown destination. But the bulk was the trust money. or what I thought was trust money. The confrontation was a blur of his denials, my accusations, his sudden, manufactured outrage that I would snoop. He twisted it, somehow making me feel guilty for finding the proof of his deceit. He spun a tangled web of lies: business investment, a temporary loan, something about diversifying assets for us. But the name, Sarah, and the starting fresh note hung in the air like toxic smoke. He wouldn't look me in the eye. Not really. His gaze skittered, his voice too loud, too fast. It wasn't the man I knew. Or perhaps it was the man I had never truly known, finally revealing himself. The days that followed were a torment. I felt like I was drowning in uncertainty. He insisted it was temporary, that the money was safe, just moved for a lucrative investment. He begged me not to tell my family, especially the trustees. That should have been the reddest flag of all, waving furiously in the wind. My family was the trust. Their lawyers were the guardians. Why would he fear them finding out unless he had done something fundamentally wrong, something the trust was designed to prevent? I called a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman recommended by a friend. She listened patiently, her face grim as I explained the situation, the trust, the sudden, unexplained transfer. When I mentioned the trust specifically, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Tell me about the trust documents," she said. "Anything specific you remember?" I rattled off what I knew. My grandfather's intent. The named trustees. The general idea of income distribution, but principal protection. He always said it was ironclad. I finished, my voice trembling. Designed to keep the money safe for generations. Safe from, well, from anything. I hadn't finished the thought aloud. Safe from bad decisions, bad marriages, bad actors. My lawyer was cautious. Divorce law was one thing. Trust law was another, often more complex beast. Especially a trust drafted by someone like my grandfather's legal team. She explained the usual complexities. Money transferred during a marriage could be seen as marital property, even if it originated from an inheritance, depending on how it was handled, commingled, etc. It felt like a punch to the gut. Had I, through sheer ignorance or trust in my husband, inadvertently made this protected money vulnerable? The possibility that the money was simply gone hung over me like a shroud. Mark became colder, more distant. He stopped pretending to explain the transfer. He started acting as if I was the problem, the one who had trust issues, who was ruining the marriage with my accusations. Sarah's name was never mentioned by him again, but I saw the signs. The late nights continued. The guarded phone calls. The subtle shifts in his routine that screamed, another life. I felt utterly alone. Friends offered sympathy, but couldn't comprehend the scale of the financial betrayal tied into the emotional one. My family was a source of potential help, but involving them felt like admitting catastrophic failure, shattering the image of the stable, secure life I'd built. And there was the shame. How could I have been so blind? How could I have married a man capable of this? The rising challenges weren't just financial, they were emotional. Mark began to weaponize the situation. He knew I was scared, uncertain about my legal standing regarding the trust money. He suggested that since our joint funds were tied up in this investment, perhaps I should contribute more from my personal, non-trust accounts to cover household expenses. He was draining me dry, financially and emotionally. Every conversation was a minefield, every interaction steeped in his silent accusation and my simmering fear and anger. He wore a mask of injured innocence mixed with weary frustration, as if he were the victim of my suspicion. Meanwhile, I imagined Sarah living comfortably, perhaps even luxuriously, on the security my grandfather had meant for my future grandchildren. My lawyer kept digging into the trust documents. She requested copies from the trustee's firm. Weeks passed. Every day felt heavier than the last. I watched our joint bank accounts dwindle. I saw charges appear that I didn't recognize, restaurants far from home, weekend getaways I wasn't on. The proof was everywhere, but it felt like I couldn't touch him, couldn't touch the money. He had created a legal and emotional shield around himself, using my vulnerability as its core. He was confident. I could see it in the casual set of his jaw, The way he avoided discussing finances, the way he looked through me when I tried to bring it up. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought the money was theirs now, his and Sarah's, a secret nest egg for their fresh start. One rainy Tuesday, my lawyer called. Her voice was different. Calmer, yes, but with an edge of something I couldn't place. "The trust documents are fascinating," she said. "Your grandfather was thorough. Very thorough." My heart sank. Thorough could mean complicated, could mean impossible to untangle. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means," she said, "that the money transferred from the trust fund account might not have been Mark's to transfer. Or yours, not unilaterally, anyway." That was the midpoint shift. It wasn't about chasing down stolen money anymore. It was about the fundamental structure of the trust itself. My lawyer explained the specific clause she'd found. A spendthrift provision, but more robust than most. It wasn't just about protecting the assets from creditors or outside lawsuits. It was about protecting the assets within the family structure. It dictated how distributions could be made, who had the authority to make them, and under what specific conditions. Any transfer of principal, or even significant income distributions beyond the standard schedule, required explicit approval from the trustees. And guess what? The trustees had approved nothing of the sort for Mark or Sarah. My initial reaction wasn't triumph. It was cautious hope, quickly followed by a wave of fear. Would the trustees even care? Would they see this as a family dispute they didn't want to get involved in? Would it be too legally complicated to reverse a transfer that had already happened? My lawyer couldn't make guarantees, but she saw a path. A strong path. The deepening crisis was the period where Mark's confidence became almost unbearable. He seemed to sense I was up to something, but he couldn't figure out what. He became more aggressive, more dismissive. He talked openly about selling the house, about needing to liquidate assets for his investment. He was preparing to leave, taking my future with him, using the excuse of this phantom investment. He was rubbing my face in it, perhaps unintentionally, perhaps deliberately. Every word, every action, felt like a confirmation of his victory and my impending ruin. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly desperate. But beneath the desperation, the conversation with my lawyer was a tiny ember of defiance. I started changing my behavior too. I stopped arguing about the money. I stopped asking where he was going or who he was with. I became quiet, compliant almost. Let him think he had broken me. Let him believe I had accepted my fate or was too weak to fight back. I watched him, I listened. I gathered what little information I could without raising his suspicion. My lawyer was working in the background, gathering the necessary documentation, liaising quietly with the trust lawyers. The trust lawyers, it turned out, were very interested. Protecting the trust's assets and upholding its provisions was their primary directive, their legal and ethical obligation. A significant, unauthorized transfer of funds? That was not a family squabble. That was an attack on the trust itself. The turning point wasn't a sudden event, but a slow solidification of resolve. Each piece of information my lawyer sent, each brief, formal communication from the trust's legal team, felt like another brick being laid in a new wall around me. I wasn't just me anymore. I was also the beneficiary of my grandfather's legacy, and that legacy had teeth. The trust wasn't just a pot of money. It was a shield, crafted by hands long gone, but still powerful. My lawyer advised patience. They needed to build the case meticulously. Document everything. The unauthorized nature of the transfer. The breach of the trust's terms. The lack of trustee approval. Meanwhile, Mark grew bolder. He started making plans for the future out in the open, assuming I was just dealing with it. He talked about relocating, about a new life phase. The audacity was breathtaking. He had stolen my foundation and was using it to build a new life with someone else, right under my nose, believing I was powerless to stop him. The trap was set quietly, deliberately. The trust's lawyers initiated the process. It wasn't a personal lawsuit from me. It was an action brought by the trustees on behalf of the trust against the unauthorized recipient of the funds, Sarah, and the person who facilitated the unauthorized transfer, Mark. It wasn't about divorce or marital assets. It was about the integrity of the trust. The day the papers were served was deliberate. Not sprung on him in the middle of a fight, but delivered formally, precisely, by a neutral third party. We were supposed to meet for dinner. A rare attempt at normalcy, he'd suggested, perhaps a final olive branch before his planned departure, or maybe just to ensure I was home when the papers arrived. He was sitting on the sofa when the doorbell rang. He answered it himself. I was in the kitchen, watching through the archway. I saw the confusion on his face as the server handed him the thick envelope. Then, the color drained from him. His eyes scanned the first page, then darted back up, his brow furrowed in disbelief. He mumbled something I couldn't hear, his hand shaking as he took the envelope. He closed the door slowly, his back to me, the silence in the hall stretching taut. He turned, holding the envelope like it was something venomous. His eyes found mine, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine fear there. Not the feigned indignation, not the weary frustration. Pure, animal fear. He stumbled into the living room, dropping the envelope onto the coffee table like it burned his fingers. He sank onto the sofa, staring at it. I didn't say anything. I just walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair opposite him, the very chair where I had spent countless nights wrestling with my fear and despair. He picked up the papers again, flipping through them wildly. The legal jargon seemed to swim before his eyes. He muttered names, the trust, the trustees, the law firm I knew represented the trust. His eyes darted to my face, searching. For what? Explanation? Sympathy. What is this? His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. I kept my voice calm, steady. It's the trust, Mark. He shook his head, frantic. The trust? What about it? Why are they? He looked down at the papers again, his finger tracing the words. He found Sarah's name listed as a defendant, and a guttural sound escaped him. They're reclaiming the funds, I said simply. The transfer was unauthorized. A breach of the trust's provisions. The money was never yours to give away. Or hers to receive. His head snapped up. You did this. Accusation flared in his eyes, briefly eclipsing the fear. I didn't do anything. I corrected him, my voice flat. The trust did. My grandfather's trust. Its purpose is to protect its assets. From exactly this kind of thing. He stared at me, his face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. The sheer scale of his miscalculation hitting him. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had tripped over the intricate, unyielding legal architecture my family had built. He had treated the inheritance like personal savings, easily moved, easily hidden. He had forgotten it was held within a fortress, with its own guards. But the money is gone, he stammered. It's been spent. On things. You can't just invalidate a transfer. It doesn't work like that. Oh, but it does, I said, and for the first time, I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my gut. The trust isn't a bank account. It's a legal entity, with specific rules. Rules you bypassed. Rules that state any such transfer was void from the start. The trustees have a fiduciary duty to recover assets wrongly removed. He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. Not with anger, but with something else. The sound started low, a broken whimper, then escalated into ragged, gasping sobs. He cried like I had never seen him cry. Not the performative tears of our earlier confrontations, but a deep, guttural outpouring of pure, helpless defeat. He cried for the money, I knew it. He cried for the future he thought he had bought with stolen funds. He cried because he had been blindsided, checkmated by a force he hadn't even considered, a force I hadn't fully understood until recently myself. He had aimed to dismantle my security for his gain, and instead, that very security had turned and undone him. He wept for a long time. I just sat there, watching. There was no triumph in the moment, only a profound, weary emptiness. The man I had loved, the life I had built had been a lie. And this was the ugly, painful end of it. The plot twist wasn't just that the money was coming back. It was that the very mechanism he thought I was powerless against, the complex world of my family's wealth, was the instrument of his undoing. He hadn't just taken my money, he had violated the sanctity of the trust, and the trust, impersonal and relentless, was striking back. The aftermath wasn't swift or clean. There were more legal documents, motions, court dates. But the core issue was indisputable under the trust's terms. The money, or the equivalent value, had to be returned. The trust lawyers were efficient and detached. It wasn't personal for them. It was about upholding the law and the trust's integrity. For Mark and Sarah, it meant facing not just the loss of the money, but potential legal consequences for their actions against the trust itself. Sarah, I heard, disappeared from his life almost immediately. The fresh start evaporated the moment the financial foundation, my foundation, was yanked out from under them. Mark tried to negotiate, to plead. Not with the trust lawyers, but with me. He called, he texted, his voice raw with desperation. He begged me to call off the trust's action, as if I had the power to stop it now. As if it were simply a matter of my forgiveness. But the trust was a separate entity. Its course was set. My lawyer handled the divorce proceedings. Simple, straightforward, citing irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct related to the trust assets. He didn't fight it. He couldn't. Getting the money back wasn't like receiving a windfall. It felt more like retrieving something salvaged from a wreck. It was tainted by betrayal, by the wreckage of my marriage. But it was back. The bedrock was restored. I was financially secure again, perhaps more so than before, but the feeling of safety was gone, replaced by a hard layer of cynicism. I learned that security isn't just about money. It's about who you trust. And sometimes, the structures designed to protect you from external threats are most vital when the threat comes from within your own home. The crying? It wasn't remorse for hurting me. It was grief for his lost scheme, his lost future, his lost access to the wealth he thought he had outsmarted. It was the sound of a predator who realized he wasn't at the top of the food chain after all. Rebuilding felt like walking through a landscape fundamentally altered. The house felt different. My perspective was different. I still had the inheritance, safe within the trust's embrace, providing for me. But the innocence was gone. The assumption of shared futures, of implicit trust, was shattered. I was independent, yes, financially and emotionally, but the path to this independence had been through fire. Now, sitting here, the papers on the table no longer feel heavy. They are just papers. Proof. A testament to a hidden strength, not just mine, but the strength of the protections put in place long ago. I look out the window at the city lights. The world keeps turning. Life goes on. Scars remain, but so does the resilience. The money is back where it belongs. And so, slowly, am I. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever faced a betrayal that seemed insurmountable, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.